It's Broadcaster 7, coming to you through the airwaves again with another paranormal story. A lot of you have asked for the continuation of my Skinwalker story, so here it is. If you haven't watched the original video, you can find a link above or in the description below. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the like, subscribe, and bell icon to get alerts to all my new videos. Like I said before, my friend Nicholas went on the trip to Utah the year before me. He was the one that talked me into going in the first place. That year before, he met a teen from the reservation. Let's just call him Paul. Paul was our age at the time, which was about 17 or 18 if I remember correctly. Paul and Nicholas hit it off immediately. They got to talking, and Paul told Nicholas about the surrounding area, the rules, and the old legends of the tribe. Paul had a reputation in town for being a rule breaker and a troublemaker. He beat to the rhythm of his own drum. Paul was known to go out at night and climb the mesas, which he explained was strictly forbidden. Paul liked to explore the caves and boulders above, and he enjoyed the solitude. But this would bring him heat from the elders of the tribe. They would reprimand him any time he was caught climbing up and down the mesas, day or night. There was a reason no one was to go up there. The top of the mesa was strictly the territory of the Skinwalkers. These shape-shifting entities were once human, corrupted by their search for more power by dark and evil forces. These old tribal shaman were then banished by the tribe to live on the mesas alone long ago, cursed to forever wander the desert alone. Well, that was until Paul started exploring up there. Paul told Nicholas all about the Skinwalkers and how they would try and trick people out of the safety of the light and into the darkness. The Skinwalkers could change their voice and appearance to look like anyone or anything. It could be a coyote or even your grandmother. The Skinwalker could read your mind and find the perfect bait to lure you out into the desert. Paul explained, even though the Skinwalkers could change their shape, the Skinwalkers would appear off somehow. It could change into a deer, but somehow it would not quite be a deer. We as humans have evolved the uncanny valley for a specific reason. Maybe this is why. Millions of years of evolution designed to tell us not to trust that strange-looking human at the edge of the firelight. Paul told Nicholas a story about the last time he had climbed up the mesas, and that something or someone had followed him back down. It was late when Paul scurried down the side of the mesa that night. He wanted to get back in time before anyone saw him. He didn't need the elders on his back again. It was about an hour after sunset, and he was cutting it close. Not a lot of people would be out in the town after dark, but there was a good chance that one of the elders might still be out and about somewhere. It was like they always knew he was out doing something that he shouldn't be doing. That's when he heard the noise. Paul heard the scraping sound coming from behind him. It sounded like nails dragging across rocks. A sickening, horrible sound that makes you flinch and sends shivers all over your body. He turned quickly to see what was making that sound. About 30 yards behind him, a coyote was following him down the rocks. The animal was strange and ragged. Its fur was matted and dirty. The coyote froze the moment Paul looked at it. No movement. Everything went still. The hair on Paul's neck stood up. That voice in the back of your head that tells you something was wrong was screaming at Paul. It wasn't moving. Not even breathing. It wasn't breathing. Paul slowly started to walk backwards towards the town, which was still over 100 yards away. When I say town, what I really mean is a settlement, by the truest sense of the word. The town that Paul lived in was only a handful of houses and buildings, surrounded by streetlights and dirt roads. This made the town stand out in the utter blackness on this moonless night. As Paul stepped backwards, the coyote would step forwards. Step for step, the animal followed Paul to the border of the town. Finally, in what I'm sure felt like forever, Paul made it to the safety of one of the street lamps. He looked up at the light and breathed a sigh of relief. When he looked back down at the coyote, it was gone. just up and vanished out of thin air. After a minute of scanning the darkness to confirm it was truly gone, Paul dashed to his hogan. A hogan is a traditional Navajo dwelling that is usually round in shape and made of earth. Most of it is dug into the ground to help cool the structure. Paul heard the growl before he saw the thing out in the darkness. It was about 20 yards to the right of him. Paul skidded to a stop. He panted and tried to think of what to do. He sized up the distance from him to the hogan, and then he made up his mind and ran for the door. He was fast, running at him to intercept, but not fast enough. Paul slammed the door behind him and locked it. Paul could hear the sound of 4 paws walking around on the roof, along with a strange howling. It wasn't quite a coyote noise. It sounded more human than animal. That's when he heard it jump off the roof and land right in front of his door. The strange thing was, though, when it landed with a heavy thud, Paul described it as sounding like it landed on 2 feet, not 4. Out of nowhere, a bright light shone through the door, like a high-powered spotlight. Paul scurried back to the back of the room, jumping on his bed against the far wall. The light spilled through the cracks in the door, forming a straight line. The light slowly swept the room from left to right, as if it was scanning for something. Sweat dripped off of Paul's face as the light stopped on him. Paul said he had never felt the intense fear, hate, and malice that he felt that night concentrated in that beam of light. He had no idea how long he sat there. An hour? 2? Maybe 8? All Paul remembered was waking up the next morning in bed, as if all that happened that night before was just a bad dream. That was until he found the tracks. He found coyote tracks all over his hogan, but in front of the door, there were bare human footprints. They walked back and forth in front of his door and then led out into the desert. It hadn't been a dream at all. Paul told Nicholas that he felt that whatever it was changed him somehow. Ever since that night, Paul felt different. Paul never returned to the mesas after that night. He knew something lived up there now, something evil. Paul had always heard the stories, but he had thought they were just that, stories. He now said he was convinced they were real, and warned Nicholas not to go past the streetlights at night, and to never follow anything out there, no matter what it looked or sounded like. The next year, Nicholas told me this story. He warned me about not going into the darkness, and he told me all about the Skinwalkers. I, of course, wanted to meet Paul for myself and talk to him about his encounter. I wasn't going to miss a chance like this to talk to someone who saw something like that firsthand. We started searching the town for Paul, but we couldn't find him. Like I said before, the town wasn't big, and there weren't that many places to be. After a while, we stopped and asked someone if they had seen Paul. They stared at us with confusion and just walked off. Everyone we asked just ignored us or told us they didn't know who we were talking about. There were only a few hundred people in this town, so we were surprised that no one knew who Paul was. No matter how hard we tried, we couldn't find any sign of Paul. We even checked his hogan, but it seemed long empty. Eventually, word got around that we were looking for Paul, and one of the elders eventually found us. He pulled us aside and asked us to stop looking for Paul. When we pushed him for more information, he told us that when someone was removed from the tribe for committing a crime, it was bad luck to speak of them. The tribe was to pretend that that person didn't exist anymore. By asking about Paul, we were making the people in the town nervous and bringing bad spirits upon the town. Shocked by this, we asked what got Paul kicked out of the tribe. The elders replied that a few months before we arrived, Paul was at a bar outside of town. Paul had had a few too many drinks and gotten into a fight with someone from off the reservation. Paul beat the man to death with his bare hands and tried to run from the police. He didn't get far. Paul was in federal prison awaiting his trial. The elder asked us to stop looking for Paul, and he walked away. We stopped our search. That night, I climbed up onto a giant boulder. It was still radiating heat built up from the day in the hot sun as the night air began to cool into a chill. I stared off in the distance at the thunderstorm on the horizon as it threw lightning off into the night sky. There was no sound except for a handful of bats whizzing around grabbing whatever bugs were flying up there. I turned my attention to the mesa off in the distance, silhouetted on the night sky. It would be a few hours before the storm would be here. I thought about Paul and that pool to explore up there. I felt that too. That need to look for the unknown, to shine a light into the darkness, to explain the unexplained. I never met Paul, and I don't know what he saw in the desert that night, but his story has always stuck with me. After being out there myself, I believe him. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm out camping, I sometimes look out into the darkness and think about what could be out there. Was Paul just a bad seed that didn't like following the rules? Or did something change him that night? Did something take root somewhere in his mind or heart that changed him on a fundamental level? Did it make him into a killer? I'll never know the answer to that question. But that doesn't mean I'll ever stop looking. Have you seen something that you can't explain? I'd love to hear your story, and maybe even feature it on the channel. You can visit my website or email using the links in the description below. If you're new here and like the video you just saw, please like and subscribe. And if you're a returning viewer, I want to take the time and thank you for your support. You're the reason I keep making these videos. And I also want to thank my friend Nicholas for letting me tell this story here. I really appreciate it. I'm Broadcaster 7. Are you receiving the night signal?